When my sister got unexpectedly tasered by our HOA president over parking our guests in the wrong spot, we had no idea that she was a senior partner at one of the city's top law firms. Little did we know, this incident would lead us to uncover a significant real estate conspiracy that would put the entire corrupt board in handcuffs. Imagine if your neighborhood leaders picked a fight with the wrong family. What would you do? I remember feeling heat rise to my face when I saw the bright yellow notice stuck to my front door. Violation approved. Guest parking, $50 fine. I ripped it down just as my sister Amelia pulled into the driveway. She had been staying with me for 2 weeks while her new house was being painted. "You won't believe this," I exclaimed, waving the paper. "The HOA is already finding reasons to penalize us." Amelia chuckled, brushing it off as a typical power trip. "I'll just park on the street from now on." She walked inside, briefcase in hand, looking entirely unfazed. That was Amelia for you, cool and collected under pressure. Yet, something about this felt personal. I had lived in Pinecrest Gardens for 3 years without any issues until now. The next morning I noticed Diane Wilcox, our HOA president, taking pictures of my yard from the sidewalk. She didn't even try to be discreet. She aimed her phone directly at my house, as if it belonged to her. When she caught me watching from the window, she offered a smug little wave. "That woman is obsessed with control," my neighbor Rob told me later that day. "Ever since she became president 6 months ago, violations have soared by 300%. My kid even got fined for leaving his bike in our driveway overnight." That evening, while Amelia and I prepared dinner, the doorbell rang. Standing there were Diane and Thomas Harding, the HOA treasurer. Both wore matching navy blue blazers adorned with gold Pinecrest Gardens pins. "We need to discuss your growing list of violations," Diane stated, skipping the usual pleasantries. Her voice sounded sweet, but her eyes were anything but warm. "Growing list?" I replied, trying to remain calm. "It's just one parking notice." Thomas pulled out a tablet and began reading off a list. Unapproved guest parking, $50. Improper trash bin placement, $75. Unapproved vehicle in driveway, $100. Unauthorized wind chimes, $75. "Wind chimes?" I stammered. "I've had those for 2 years." "The bylaw against noise-making decorations was passed last month," Diane replied with a smile. "Page 47 of the updated guidelines. You did read the new manual, didn't you?" "This is absurd," I shot back. "My trash bins have always been exactly where they are." As I was standing by the side of the house, Thomas explained, "Yours are 8 inches out. I measured it myself." Just then, Amelia appeared behind me. "Is there something I can help with?" she asked. If you've made it this far and are enjoying the drama of these HOA stories, you're not alone. Don't miss out on the rest of the story. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for even more shocking twists. Diane narrowed her eyes at her. "And you are?" "I'm her sister, not a guest," Amelia replied calmly. "I'm staying here temporarily while my house is being renovated." Diane quickly interjected, "Any stay over 10 days needs board approval." She continued, "That's another $150 fine." I suddenly felt a tightness in my chest. This situation was spiraling out of control. "Rules are rules," Thomas said with a shrug. "Payment is due in 48 hours, Diane added, handing me a bill that totaled $450. "After that, it doubles, and we need your sister's vehicle removed from the property by tomorrow." As they walked away, I noticed Diane whispering something to Thomas, and they both laughed as they glanced back at my house. "Don't let them get to you," Amelia said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "This kind of petty behavior happens more often than you'd think." That night, sleep eluded me. I kept wondering why Diane had singled me out. Around 2 a.m., I heard a car door slam. Peeking through the blinds, I saw Thomas placing something on my mailbox. Once he left, I quietly snuck outside to find another violation notice, this time for unapproved exterior lighting, with a $100 fine for my porch light, the same one I had always used. The next day, I learned that 3 more neighbors received similar notices. Ellen across the street got fined for having flower pots in colors that didn't conform, and old Mr. Jacobson, 2 doors down, received a $200 fine because his grandson's tricycle was visible from the street. "Something doesn't smell right here," Ellen said when we met at the mailboxes. Diane's husband works for Valley Development Group. They've been buying up houses in neighborhoods like ours. That afternoon, I watched from my kitchen window as Diane and Thomas walked through the neighborhood, pointing at houses and making notes. They stopped by my driveway, and I saw Diane pull out a measuring tape to check something from my mailbox to the street. She smiled as she wrote down her notes. While Amelia was at work, I decided to do some research. I accessed the county property records website, and what I discovered made my stomach drop. 6 homes in our neighborhood had been sold in the last 3 months, all to shell companies linked to Valley Development Group. When Amelia got home, I shared my findings with her. "Classic story," she said while reviewing my notes. "Create impossible standards, harass homeowners with fines, and drive people to sell. What can we do?" "First, we need to document everything," I replied. She pulled out her laptop and began showing me all the violation notices. As she typed, I noticed a change in my sister. While her calm professionalism was still there, now there was a steely determination in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Amelia," I said slowly, "what exactly do you do at your law firm?" She looked up with a slight smile. "I specialize in property law and predatory housing practices, but let's keep that our secret for now." The next morning, I woke up to find my entire front yard filled with bright orange violation flags. Each one had its own infraction written on it: grass too tall, unapproved plant species, and decorative rock placement violation. From across the street, I noticed Diane watching me from her window, a coffee cup in hand. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she smiled even wider. What she didn't see was Amelia snapping photos of each flag, her phone timestamping and geotagging the images. Nor was she aware that my neighbor Rob's security camera was capturing the entire scene from his porch. "This means war," I whispered to myself. Then I gasped in disbelief as I turned onto my street. A large tow truck was backing up to Amelia's car, its lights flashing. 2 men in uniforms were attaching chains while Diane stood nearby, arms folded and a triumphant look on her face. "Stop!" I shouted, rushing toward them. "What are you doing? That car is legally parked on a public street." One of the tow operators looked uneasy. "Ma'am, we have authorization from the HOA to remove this vehicle." "But the HOA has no authority over public streets," I insisted, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the police." Diane stepped forward, her heels clicking on the pavement. "Actually, we do have authority. This section of street was deeded to the association in the original community plan, page 118 of the covenants." She handed me a paper stamped with an official-looking mark. "Plus, your sister is an unauthorized resident. The total fine is now $650, due immediately." My hands shook as I struggled to comprehend the situation. "This isn't right," I said. "Rules are rules," Diane replied with a shrug, reminiscent of Thomas's attitude from yesterday. "Maybe you should consider whether this neighborhood is really right for you." I watched helplessly as they towed Amelia's car away. On my front door was a boot notice, along with another violation paper that read, "Unsightly yard decorations." It came with a $200 fine. Inside, I called Amelia right away. "They towed your car from the street." My voice trembled. Fueled by frustration, I felt the urge to react, but Amelia responded calmly. "I got an alert from my tracking app. Don't worry, I've already contacted our police liaison." "Police liaison? Amelia, what's going on?" I asked, sensing the seriousness in her voice. "I'll explain later. Right now I need you to take pictures of every document you've received. And don't touch those flags in the yard. We need them as evidence." A couple of hours went by, and a knock at the door revealed Rob and Ellen both carrying HOA violation notices. Ellen waved hers in the air. "We got hit too. $300 fine for excessive garden gnomes. I only have one." Rob looked disheartened. "They're saying my American flag is at an unapproved angle, whatever that means." Soon 5 more neighbors arrived, each sharing a similar story. Margaret showed us a $250 fine for a bird feeder she'd owned for 12 years. Old Mr. Jacobson had been told his handicap ramp needed to be removed because it wasn't pre-approved. Then Sophia, a single mom from 2 streets over, broke down in tears as she explained that the HOA threatened to put a lien on her house because her kids left bicycles in the front yard. "They're targeting the people who can't easily fight back," Rob observed. "Elderly folks, single parents, people who work long hours." Just then, Amelia walked in, accompanied by a police officer. My sister appeared composed, but I noticed her tight grip on her leather portfolio. "Everyone, this is Officer Rivera," she announced. "He's here to take statements about the illegal towing and harassment." The officer nodded, suggesting he was familiar with the situation. "We've received multiple complaints regarding this HOA in recent weeks," he said. "I'd like to hear from each of you." As everyone recounted their experiences, Amelia set up her laptop and connected it to the TV. "While Officer Rivera documents your accounts, I want to show you what I've discovered." The screen filled with a detailed spreadsheet containing dates, addresses, fine amounts, and photos. "I've been tracking every violation notice in this neighborhood over the past 2 weeks," Amelia explained. "In total, there have been 93 violations issued in just 14 days, compared to only 3 or 7 in the entire previous year." She clicked to the next screen, revealing a map of our neighborhood. Different colored highlights marked the houses: red for those that received more than 5 violations, yellow for homes that had recently sold. "Notice anything?" Amelia asked. The pattern quickly became clear. The houses facing the most violations were right next to recently sold properties. "They create a domino effect," Amelia explained. "They push one homeowner out and then target their neighbors." "But why?" Margaret questioned, the confusion evident in her voice. Amelia accessed the property records, revealing that all 7 recently sold homes were bought by shell companies linked to Valley Development Group. They've been acquiring neighboring properties. Officer Rivera glanced up from his notepad, noting that Valley Development is currently under investigation in 3 counties for similar practices. At that moment, the doorbell rang. When I answered, Thomas stood on the porch, flanked by 2 men dressed in uniforms from Valley Protection Services. "We're here to collect the outstanding fines," he announced loudly, "plus a new $500 penalty for running a business from a residential property." I repeated, "Business?" He pointed to the cars parked outside my house. "That's a clear violation of residential use restrictions." Officer Rivera, who had positioned himself behind me, asked, "Is there a problem here?" Thomas's demeanor changed as he realized the situation was escalating. "This is a private HOA matter," he tried to insist, but Rivera calmly replied, "I'm investigating multiple complaints of harassment and potential fraud. I'll need your name for my report." Thomas hesitated and then backed away, saying he would need to consult their attorney. "That's a wise choice," Amelia chimed in, stepping forward. "And while you're at it, please inform your attorney that Lockhart and Montgomery will be filing a formal records request tomorrow morning. We'll need all HOA financial documents, board meeting minutes, and violation records for the past 5 years." Thomas's expression turned pale as he grasped the implications. He looked at Amelia with newfound caution. "Who exactly are you?" Amelia handed him her business card. "Amelia Reynolds, Senior Partner of the Property Rights Division. I specialize in HOA overreach and developer fraud." As Thomas hurried away, the security guards followed closely behind him. A new car then pulled up, and a well-dressed woman stepped out holding a news camera. "Is this the house?" she asked, introducing herself as Maya Chan from Channel 7 News. "We received an anonymous tip about HOA harassment in this neighborhood." Across the street, Diane emerged from her house, her face twisted with fury as she pressed her phone to her ear. "What have you done?" I turned to Amelia, whispering, "Have we given them something to worry about?" She smiled back at me. "Just wait until the board meeting tomorrow night. We'll all be there." Later that night, as we shared dinner and discussed our next steps, Amelia laid out her strategy. "We need to document everything to build our case for the Homeowners' Rights Commission. They can freeze the HOA's authority during their investigation." Suddenly, a loud crash interrupted us. We rushed to the window to find my mailbox toppled over and a car speeding away from my driveway. On the ground was a spray-painted message, "Sell or else." Amelia was busy taking photos while I called Officer Rivera, waiting for him to show up. She looked at me seriously and said, "This just became much more than HOA overreach. They're getting desperate, and that makes them dangerous." From across the street, I noticed Diane watching us from her window, the light from her phone illuminating her face as she recorded the scene. Suddenly, there was a loud banging on my front door that startled me awake at 6:03 a.m. I hurried downstairs in my pajamas, my heart racing. Through the peephole, I saw 5 figures on my porch. Diane, Thomas, 2 board members I barely recognized, and 2 men in black uniforms from Valley Protection Services. "Open up! HOA business!" Diane shouted sharply. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door, and before I could greet anyone, Diane brushed past me, her expensive perfume filling the hallway. "We have evidence of an unauthorized resident and an illegal neighborhood meeting," she declared, waving a folder bursting with papers. "Your fines now total $1,500 due today." Still groggy from sleep, I blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about? You can't just barge in here." Thomas stepped forward, his round face flushed with excitement. "Actually, Section 17B of the Covenant gives us emergency access rights when there's suspected rule breaking." He adjusted his glasses with pride. "We've documented everything." One of the security guards, a tall man with a military-style haircut, moved closer to Diane. His hand rested near his taser. "Ma'am, we need to speak with the unauthorized occupant immediately." I found my voice and protested. "My sister is sleeping. Come back at a reasonable hour with proper notice." Diane's thin lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Wake her now, or we add another $500 for obstruction." I called up the stairs for Amelia, my voice shaky. When she appeared at the top in her oversized t-shirt and shorts, her hair a mess from sleep, I could see Diane's eyes narrow in satisfaction. "What's happening?" Amelia asked as she descended slowly. The second guard, shorter but broader, moved to block the bottom of the stairs. "Are you the individual residing here without HOA approval?" he asked. "I'm visiting my sister," Amelia replied calmly, though I could see her lawyer instincts kicking in. "And you have no authority to interrogate me in a private home." Thomas pulled out a tablet and pointed to it. Section 4C clearly states that guests may not stay longer than 5 consecutive nights without board approval. He showed us the screen with a sense of urgency. "It's been 14 days. You've been counting, right?" I felt a wave of shock wash over me. "You're violating residence regulations," he continued, seemingly unfazed. "The fine is now $2,500. You need to pay it immediately, or we'll start eviction proceedings on Monday." At that moment, Amelia reached the bottom of the stairs. "Can I see your authorization documents for this visit and the credentials for your security personnel?" Her tone was firm, and I sensed a shift in the atmosphere. One of the guards replied dismissively, "We don't need to show you anything. You're not a resident." But Amelia stood her ground. "I'm asking as an attorney," she explained, standing taller. "You've entered a private home with armed personnel. Show me your legal basis for this." The tension in the room was palpable. The taller guard moved closer to Amelia. "You need to step back, ma'am." My sister instinctively flinched away. "Do not touch me. I haven't given you permission to enter this home or make physical contact." What happened next is seared into my memory. The second guard unclipped his taser, aimed it at Amelia's chest, and fired. The sharp crack of the taser mixed with Amelia's scream, creating a horrifying sound as she collapsed to the floor, her body twitching in convulsions. I rushed forward, dropping to my knees beside her. "What have you done? Call an ambulance." Diane stood over us, arms crossed, observing my sister's distress with an unsettling air of satisfaction. This is what happens when people don't respect our community standards. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone from the entry table and called 911. "My sister has been tasered in my home by HOA security. We need police and an ambulance." The guards exchanged worried glances, while Thomas stepped back, uncertain. "Everyone stay where you are," I shouted, surprising myself with the strength of my voice. "The police will sort this out." Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw my neighbor Sarah by the window, her phone raised, recording the entire scene. She nodded subtly, assuring me that she had caught it all on camera. What Diane, Thomas, and their guards didn't know was that Amelia wasn't just any lawyer. She was a senior partner at Lockhart and Montgomery, the firm that had famously toppled the corrupt West Ridge City Council last year in a case that made headlines nationwide. They were about to discover that they'd underestimated her. As I held Amelia's hand, tears streamed down my face. Despite her pain, there was a spark in her eyes that hinted at determination, like calm before the storm. I couldn't help but wonder how our quiet neighborhood would endure the legal turmoil that lay ahead. The emergency room doctor informed me that Amelia was fortunate the taser didn't cause any serious heart issues. Lying in the hospital bed, pale but alert, nurses hurried around. "We'll monitor her for 24 hours, but she should be fine," he assured me. I squeezed her hand, emotion overwhelming me as the reality of the situation sank in. The police were taking statements from everyone, including Sarah, who had captured the incident on video. "Those people are claiming you threatened them," I said, watching Amelia wince as she attempted to sit up. It was a typical deflection strategy. "Did they arrest the guard who tasered me?" I asked. The doctor replied that he'd been taken in for questioning, just like Diane and Thomas, who left in separate police cars. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from neighbors who had heard what happened. Even people I didn't know well were reaching out, sharing their own experiences with our overreaching homeowners association. "Listen to this," I said, reading aloud one message. "Mrs. Jenkins was fined $700 for planting tulips instead of daffodils." The stories continued as I scrolled through. The Rodriguez family had their Halloween decorations taken down last year for using purple lights instead of orange. Amelia, despite her discomfort, was clearly thinking ahead. "Print out every message," she suggested. "We need to show a pattern of unfair enforcement." Just then, my phone rang. It was Sarah. I answered and put her on speaker. "You won't believe this," she said, her voice low with excitement. "After I sent that video to the police, I sent it to my cousin Ellie at the county records office. She dug up the property records for every board member's house." I leaned in closer to hear. "Guess what? Diane doesn't even own her house. Neither does Thomas. Their properties are owned by something called Valley Development Group." Amelia's eyes widened at the news. "Look up their website," she urged. With shaking hands, I quickly searched for Valley Development on my phone. Their sleek site displayed plans for a large luxury condo complex. I scrolled down to the location map and gasped. "It's our neighborhood," I exclaimed. "They've planned right over our homes." "Exactly," Sarah replied. "Ellie said they've secretly bought 7 houses in Pinecrest Gardens already. And do you know who sits on Valley's advisory board? Diane." Thomas and Janet from the architectural committee were making things difficult for Amelia. It wasn't just a petty display of power. They were systematically enforcing rules that felt unfair and creating steep fines that pushed people out of their homes, allowing Valley Development to purchase properties at low prices. I couldn't help but reflect on the last 6 months, the sudden surge in violation notices, and the harsh penalties we faced. Everything clicked into place, but I was still confused about why they were targeting us specifically. "Your house is at the corner of the proposed entrance for their development," Sarah explained. Ellie showed me the plans, and it became clear they needed our property more than some others. Outside the hospital room, I spotted a police officer standing guard. The nurse had mentioned patient safety after an incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there might be more to it than that. Amelia's phone buzzed with a message, and despite her discomfort, she smiled. Edward Lockhart, the managing partner at my firm, had taken our case personally. "He called the district attorney directly after hearing what happened," she said, her voice gaining strength. My eyes widened at the thought. Edward and D.A. Michaels had gone to law school together, and our firm had played a part in exposing a real estate corruption case last year in West Ridge. Amelia looked determined again. This wasn't the first time developers had used local authorities to their advantage. A nurse came in with medication and checked Amelia's vitals. Once she left, my sister squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Tell everyone in the neighborhood to document everything," she urged. "Every fine, every conversation, every board decision, and most importantly, don't pay a single cent more in fines. Not one penny." I nodded, already typing a message for our neighborhood group chat. "What about the police?" I asked. "What did they say would happen next?" The officer who took my statement had mentioned that tasering someone in their own home for violating HOA rules could be seen as excessive force, or worse, assault. Amelia closed her eyes briefly, but added, "We have to act quickly. People like Valley Development can make problems vanish." Just then, my phone buzzed with a news alert. A local reporter had somehow gotten hold of Sarah's video, and the headline read, "HOA security tasers homeowner's sister in dawn raid." "It's starting," Amelia whispered as the night deepened. I stayed by Amelia's side while she reached out to colleagues at her firm. With each passing hour, we received new messages that kept us alert and aware of the growing situation. As the midnight hour approached, Sarah's message sent a chill through me. She had just driven past Diane's house and noticed a large meeting taking place there, with black SUVs displaying Valley Development logos parked in the driveway. Amelia, who was seated beside me, read the text over my shoulder and nodded, her expression serious. "They're scrambling," she said. I glanced at my sister, still focused on her monitors. Despite her injuries, her mind was sharp and active. "What comes next?" I asked. Amelia's face shifted to one of fierce determination I had never seen before. "Now we go to war. Legal war." While Diane was busy meeting with executives from Valley Development, completely unaware of the storm brewing against her, she didn't realize three critical things. The district attorney's office had just received our evidence package, Amelia's law firm had assigned 5 attorneys to our case, and perhaps most importantly, the HOA's financial records from the past 5 years were about to be subpoenaed first thing in the morning. Would our peaceful neighborhood ever be the same when the truth about Diane's corruption came to light? Then came the moment that shattered everything. I was on the phone with the police, frantically describing the chaos in my living room. My door broken, papers strewn everywhere, furniture overturned. A handwritten note had been pinned to my wall with a kitchen knife, warning me to drop it or else. My hands trembled as I snapped photos of the scene before the police arrived. Amelia entered the disarray with an unsettling calm. Her trained eyes caught details I missed. "Look at these boot prints," she said, pointing out a familiar tread pattern, the same as the security guards Diane had hired. She picked up a business card that had fallen from someone's pocket. Valley Protection Services. The police took our statements, but their interest seemed to fade until Amelia mentioned her status as a senior partner at Lockhart and Montgomery. Suddenly, their demeanor shifted. "We've got you on 4 security cameras. Diane," I overheard a detective say later on the phone. "Your security guards, too. Breaking and entering is a felony." The very next morning, a certified letter arrived from the HOA informing me they were placing a $115,000 lien on my house for accumulated fines and penalties. 3 of my neighbors received similar notices within hours. "Perfect timing," Amelia remarked, adding the letter to her pile of evidence. "Now we've got proof they're retaliating." She hadn't slept a wink, the taser marks on her chest still bright and vivid. All night long, legal books cluttered our dining table, while case files filled every chair, the doorbell ringing intermittently as the battle lines were drawn. The phone rang constantly that day, with neighbors sharing their own unsettling experiences with the Homeowners Association, HOA. Mrs. Patel talked about being fined for the ethnic plants in her garden, while the Johnsons faced eviction threats due to a wheelchair ramp for their son. Single dad Miguel shared a shocking photo of Diane measuring his grass with a ruler. Something didn't seem right. Amelia, who had been analyzing neighborhood property maps she obtained from the county records, pointed out, "Why is our HOA suddenly enforcing rules that nobody cared about for years?" Just then, Sarah from next door burst in, clearly excited. "My cousin at the county records office found something huge!" She dropped a stack of papers onto the table. "Diane doesn't even own her house. It's owned by Valley Development Group. They're the ones behind that big condo project downtown." Amelia grabbed the papers, her eyes widening as the pieces connected. "This explains everything," she said, opening her laptop to show us a complicated web of connections. Valley Development had secretly purchased 6 homes in our neighborhood, and 3 HOA board members, including Diane and Thomas, were on their payroll. "They're forcing people out," Amelia explained. "They create violations, impose impossible fines, and drive down property values so Valley can buy homes at a lower price." That evening, we called an emergency neighborhood meeting at the community center, and over 50 people showed up, fearful yet angry. Amelia displayed her findings on the wall, including Sarah's video of a recent taser incident. Gasps echoed through the room as bank statements revealed thousands in HOA fees funneled to shell companies linked to Valley Development. "The HOA has broken laws in ways I can't even count," Amelia explained in straightforward terms. They've made up rules, held secret meetings, and taken our money. Mr. Jenkins, our oldest resident, stood up, visibly shaken. They told me I had to pay $5,000 for my bird bath, or I'd lose my home, he said, his voice trembling. I've lived here for 30 years. Amelia placed her hand on his shoulder and assured him, Not anymore, sir. My law firm is filing a class action lawsuit tomorrow. We're going after Valley Development, the HOA board, and those security thugs. As people left the meeting with newfound hope, we noticed that every single car in the parking lot was plastered with violation notices. Across the street, Diane stood watching us with two security guards, fury clear on her face. This isn't over, she shouted. Amelia calmly replied, Actually, it is. We just got a court order freezing the HOA accounts. She pulled out her phone with a hint of satisfaction. A news van pulled into the parking lot, and a reporter along with a cameraman jumped out. Are you Amelia? We have your evidence package regarding the HOA corruption scandal, they said. Diane's expression changed as she noticed the cameras. She quickly made her way to her car with security guards right behind her. At home, while I was cleaning up broken glass from my doorway, Amelia's phone rang. It was the district attorney himself, recalling her from the city corruption case last year. He mentioned they were starting an immediate investigation. We're winning, Amelia said, finally allowing a smile to break through. However, at 3 a.m., we abruptly woke to the sound of screeching tires. When we looked out the window, we saw Diane's car speeding away into the night. Look, I said, pointing as flames began to flare up behind her house. She's burning the evidence, Amelia whispered in shock. I frantically shouted into my phone, Fire trucks now! As flames leapt from Diane's backyard. Neighbors emerged from their homes, some still in pajamas, while Amelia dashed across the street. Stay back, she shouted, pulling me away from the fire. Look at what she's burning. In Diane's fire pit, we spotted file folders and papers curling in the flames. One partially burned document flew out, revealing a contract between Valley Development and HOA board members. She's destroying evidence, Amelia said, quickly snapping photos. Firefighters arrived minutes later, followed by police who secured the area as a potential crime scene. Detective Rodriguez examined the smoldering remains. This is now part of our investigation, he informed us, carefully bagging the charred scraps of paper. We've been monitoring Mrs. Wilcox since your report yesterday. By dawn, neighbors had gathered on my lawn, bringing coffee and donuts. Did you see Diane drive away last night? Asked Miguel. She had suitcases packed. Looks like she was trying to run. Sarah nodded in agreement, saying, Classic guilty move. At 9 a.m., my phone buzzed with a news alert. Local HOA president arrested at airport. The accompanying video showed Diane in handcuffs, being led away from the boarding area of a flight to Mexico. Got her, cheered Mrs. Patel, who was watching over my shoulder. Amelia's phone rang constantly that morning, first her law firm, then the district attorney, then reporters. By noon, Thomas, the HOA treasurer, turned himself in, agreeing to testify against Diane and Valley Development for a lighter sentence. He's singing like a bird, Amelia told me, covering her phone with excitement. 3 years ago, Diane was placed in our neighborhood by a development company to help them acquire homes at below market value. They offered her a 10% commission for every house she sold. One afternoon, we received surprising news. 17 homeowners in Pinecrest Gardens had already sold their homes to Val Development at significant losses, largely due to harassment from the Homeowners Association, HOA. The development company had plans to build a luxury condo tower right where our homes were located, and things took a turn for the worse. As Amelia went through some financial records that were ordered to be released by the court, she revealed that over $300,000 had been misappropriated from our HOA maintenance fund. This explained why our playground was in disrepair and why our pool hadn't been cleaned. The very next day, news crews filled our street to cover the arrest of a security guard who had tasered Amelia. Footage showed him being read his rights while neighbors cheered from their front yards. It turned out he wasn't even licensed to carry a taser. Detective Rodriguez informed us that these individuals were essentially hired enforcers in fake uniforms. A week later, our urgency petition to freeze all HOA activities was granted by the judge. Judge Martinez stated, "This court has no choice but to appoint a receiver until new elections can be held," citing overwhelming evidence of fraud and corruption. Following this, the CEO of Valley Development, along with two city officials who hastily approved zoning changes for the condo project, faced indictments. As a result, the company's stock plummeted and investors pulled out. During one of our evenings together, Amelia pointed out a secret bank account in documents we were reviewing. "That's where your HOA fees went," she said. "Straight to the Cayman Islands." The district attorney held a press conference to thank Amelia and our community for bringing this scheme to light, stating, "This kind of corruption harms real families," and warned that similar operations could exist in other neighborhoods. Just 6 weeks later, our class action lawsuit led to Valley Development paying $4.8 million to the affected homeowners. All improper fines were canceled, and liens on houses were removed. The company was also forced to sell back the 17 properties they had acquired through their deceptive practices. "Totally worth getting tasered for," Amelia joked as we watched the settlement announcement on TV. The best moment came 2 months after Diane's arrest, when our neighborhood gathered in the newly renovated community center, funded by the settlement, to elect a new HOA board. Mrs. Patel, Miguel, and Sarah were among those chosen to lead us, and Sarah proudly announced our first act as the new board president. Amelia was thrilled when her proposed bylaws received unanimous approval. These new rules emphasized financial transparency, required recorded meetings open to all residents, and called for an annual independent audit. The reaction was overwhelming, with applause filling the room as Amelia beamed with pride. Later that evening, while neighbors enjoyed refreshments and mingled, Amelia took me aside. "My firm wants me to lead a new division," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "We'll help neighborhoods tackle corrupt homeowners associations." I felt a twinge of disappointment when she mentioned moving back to her downtown apartment. But then she pointed over the street, and I saw a "for sale" sign outside Diane's old house. "I made a full-price offer this morning," she said, grinning. I couldn't help but hug her tightly. "Diane would hate that." Amelia leaned in closer. "Oh, and one more thing. The FBI visited my office today. Our little HOA scandal uncovered something much bigger. Corrupt HOAs and development companies using the same schemes across 6 different states." 3 months later, Pinecrest Gardens held its first neighborhood block party. Children laughed and played on new playground equipment, while adults grilled burgers and shared stories. The community had embraced its new features, like the basketball hoop, bird feeders, and an ethnic garden, putting any past violation notices behind them. Mr. Jenkins unveiled a community garden where Diane's old house once stood. Amelia believed the neighborhood needed green space more than she needed that house. "From this soil, something good will grow," the old man said as he planted the first tomato seedling. That evening, twinkling lights illuminated our cul-de-sac as neighbors danced to music. I spotted Amelia chatting with Detective Rodriguez, who had become a friend. "Remember when she had me tasered right at your doorway?" Amelia laughed, nodding toward my front door. "Biggest mistake of her life," I replied. "No," Amelia corrected me, glancing around at our transformed neighborhood. "Her biggest mistake was thinking she could break a community instead of bringing it together." Looking at the faces of neighbors who had become like family through our shared struggle, I realized something important. Sometimes it takes standing up to bullies to discover your own strength. And often, the most unexpected heroes are the ones sitting right across from you at the dinner table.